Namaste, all of you. Welcome to a new episode and the second part of a conversation with Lois Steinberg, a world renowned teacher of Iyengar Yoga and a longtime student of BKS Iyengar. In this episode, Lois will reflect on how her yoga practice has changed and evolved over the years, and what young and senior practitioners should be mindful of for their practice. As Lois has authored numerous books on yoga, including Gita Iyengar's Guide to Women's Yoga Practice and the Iyengar Yoga Cancer book, we would explore yoga and its effects on health far more deeply. In what ways can yoga practice be helpful for women in coping with various women's health issues? Can yoga treat cancer? At what stage and condition can yoga make an effective impact? Additionally, Lois will speak about her project in Botswana and why she is actively involved in building a wildlife rescue there. We would also hear Lois's reflections on Svadhyaya and how the study of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras could bring depth to your asana practice. You've already mentioned it a little bit about the asana practice compared to the early days of your yoga journey, and now how did your practice change and evolve?
I wish everyone really didn't have to start from the standing poses in the front of the book. I wish everyone could start with the poses in the back of the book, because when you're young, that's what you need to be doing. And I often saw when Abi had finally moved to Pune, and Raya also, that he was teaching them, the poses in the back of the book, because that's the age when you can do them, and if you do them, then even if you can't do them later in life, having done them and practiced then, you're always going to know how to impart those kind of fun, body nodding, challenging, impossible poses. And so, I practiced all those poses and it was really fun and dynamic. But of course, that changes as you age. Life interrupts, things happen, accidents happen, your body isn't going to go through life unscathed. So you have to accept that you're not going to be able to do the same type of practice. And it's okay. That's part of the, santosh, that you're at peace with what you're given in this life. You accept it. And so, there's some things I can still do, which I'm very proud of, which I probably shouldn't, be proud of it, but I can still do Urdhva Kukutasana on a good day, maybe even Parshva Urdhva Kukutasana. But there's certain things in the back bends, because I've had accidents and injuries, that I'm not able to do the advanced back bending poses like Natarajasana. And I remember on my 60th birthday, yes, I dropped back and came up 60 times, but now I'm doing 108 Surya Namaskars instead to celebrate on my birthday. And I'm surprised I can still do that. So there's still fun things that I like to do, but there's also things that I'm not able to do. And, I miss it. I do miss it. I admit that, but I'm okay with it. It's like I've been there, I've done it. I know what it feels like. I can teach it. I can help somebody with it because I've done it. So as a youngster, go for all those challenging poses. Of course, people who are interested in becoming a teacher and, having to, go through assessment, you have to learn the base, don't you? But that doesn't mean give up the fun of practicing the poses in the back of the book just because they're not on the list of poses that you're being tested for. You should absolutely do them if you're young. Older is a different thing. You shouldn't injure yourself. That's what happens. You just accept that, you've done these poses and it was fun while it lasted, and it lasted for decades, and now it's different, and you have to practice so that you're not harming yourself in any way.
Anything on pranayama practice that has changed for you?
Pranayama practice. Pranayama practice. I love pranayama. For a lot of people, it's touch and go. They practice it, they don't practice it, they don't practice it, they don't practice it, they practice it. I remember one time when I was a year in India, and it was morning class with Prashant, and he asked, and it was pranayama week, and he asked people in the class, how many of you did pranayama today? No, how many of you did not practice pranayama today? And only 2 people honestly raised their hands that they didn't do it. And so he sat those 2 people up on the platform, and they were just to sit there for the entire class while the rest of us were doing practice. To me, that point was they were the only honest ones. We should feel ashamed of ourselves, you know, that we weren't really honest. You know, it's like when you speak the truth, the words you say then are truth. And so it's a lesson, like it really came to be, was like, oh, we didn't speak the truth. And, it's better to be clear and honest and speak the truth. But actually, for me, I don't know what it was, but I really took to pranayama. I just, first thing in the morning, that's what I do. Even when I travel, that's what I do. Even when I was, I was recently in Botswana on a safari. Okay, it's not ideal conditions. You don't have the bolster and stuff, but I would wake up in the morning and I would manage somehow with whatever I had to do lying pranayama and then seated pranayama, even though the conditions weren't great to do it. And then even if I travel, where sometimes, it's terrible travel, like sometimes you have to wake up at 1 a.m. to catch a crazy flight. And I, would wake up even earlier because I have to do the pranayama. I feel I've never not done pranayama. And okay, sometimes it's maybe just 5 minutes lying down, but that's pranayama, paying attention to the breath, the positioning of the body. If that's all you do, that's pranayama. That's a practice. So that's how I actually relate with students. My experience is just do for 5 minutes, just position the body, because that's the requirement for pranayama, is the positioning of the body, that it's even so that it can deeply rest and you're open to the breathing exercises. If that's all you do and you're just observing the breath and it's 5 minutes, that's all you do. But then it grows because you get so much even from that little 5 minutes. I would, if I miss asana, for a day, that's fine, sort of. But if I cannot miss pranayama. It's a life giver. It's a life sustainer. It balances you. It sets your day. I like to do it in the morning. Some people, I have somebody I know, they do it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon every day. That's fine. That's what they need. But I get up and I need to do the pranayama practice, and I can't live without it. It's just like I tell students, you don't leave well, maybe some people do, but you don't leave your house without brushing your teeth. I don't leave my house without brushing my body with pranayama. And
So
of course, having practiced it for decades and decades, in the beginning, it was very different. It was such a struggle, a lot of shakiness. It was actually sometimes making you worse and not better because you were trying too hard. And the practice in the beginning, when I learned a very strong practice. It was with Gita Iyengar at the Women's Intensive in 1997 that she taught a different way of making it softer and quieter, that it really evolved for me. But it's kind of like asana in that, do these strong, fun, dynamic poses, get the body moving, getting going, and then refine it. It's also true for pranayama. Get that seat, and you're sweating bullets. Like, what is this? This is pranayama where I'm sweating and it's agitating. Actually, there's even research, not on pranayama, but on asana, that shows that, it's very true for our Iyengar system, that what happens to our central nervous system as a beginner practitioner is you get more nervous. You actually increase what's going on in your sympathetic system, the flight, the fight or freeze response, the stress response, because you're like, oh my God, my right foot out, my left foot in, I have to go down, I have to come up. Oh, I have to get my buttock in, head back, I have to do this, this, this. It actually increases your stress levels. It has been shown that yoga will increase it. But as you practice, same thing, especially with head balance, it's so hard. It's really hard, but then it becomes the easier one compared to shoulder balance. Shoulder balance is easier to learn, harder to sustain and do. Head balance is harder to learn, but after about 8 years of trying to balance, you become stable and it becomes a cooling pose. And so everything evolves like that. And then you come into the predominant state of that relaxation response. Doesn't happen right away. People think, oh, yoga, you're going to be so relaxed. No, not necessarily.
Not in Iyengar.
No.
So could you tell a little more about your asana and pranayama practice today? How much time do you
Well,
do? What time of the day?
today I had to teach at 7 a.m. pranayama. So I did the pranayama first. I went and taught pranayama. And then the pranayama class is only an hour. And then normally on Mondays, I actually have a session with my aspiring level 1 and 2 teachers. We practice together. I have them teach, but I'm not doing it this month. So I was able to do my usual. Today's Monday, and Mondays are my day for doing all the standing poses, timing them for long periods of time, getting grounded, doing the poses for a minute each side, except for Virabhadrasana 3. I'm just happy to get, I don't time it. I actually watch my breath and see if I can hold it on the left side as long as I did on the right side for the same amount of breaths. Actually, I try to do more breaths because you're breathing more on the second side. But yeah, so today was that grounding, balancing practice of standing poses, and always inversions.
I want to continue with the next topic, which is yoga practice and the effects on health, specifically on women's health. I've learned a little bit of your story and how yoga impacted your health and helped with the issues that you were having. So through your work, you have been helping many women to recover from different illnesses and benefit from yoga. You have also written a book on the asana practice for women with the focus on menstrual cycle. In your experience, what makes yoga so powerful and what makes it such a powerful tool in solving women's health issues? Let's start with this one.
It may not solve the issue, but it helps you certainly to cope with it and to reduce the effects, of living with some issues. Yeah, I had some very powerful experiences. And in fact, when I was in graduate school for too long, for 9 years, because when I finished a project, I would go to India to recover for like 4 months and then go back and continue working. So I didn't get my degree for 9 years, and I was working in a basement with no windows for 9 years. And I was on a computer and I was working 17-hour days, and I had too many jobs. And I was also helping my academic advisor with their work and then my research work and my yoga. And it was crazy. It was absolutely nuts. I was working 17 hours a day nonstop for like 9 years and not being in a healthy environment in that basement with no windows. It was awful. And some days, like, the students that I was teaching, 8 a.m., it was actually very far away and I only had a bicycle. And in the dead of winter, I would get on the bicycle. I would put my yoga props on the back of the bicycle. And it would be like 7 a.m. that I had to bike all across the city to get to this place to teach. And sometimes I was just crying because it was too much, every day, 4 days a week for that. So by the time I finished my degree, I was totally broken. And I was also unwell. I had a thyroid condition I didn't know I had. And I was having menstrual problems. And so when I arrived in Pune, I ended up staying for a couple of years with some small trips back home. But over time, I was having, I was mostly in India. Gita saw me come destroyed person. And that's when I really got helped by her. She really took me under her wings. And, I had these fibroids where it felt like a knife going into my abdomen and dragging across my stomach 24 hours a day. And even though it felt better quite quickly, she wouldn't let me leave the trestle for like 6 months. I had to face in the trestle with the standing poses. So it was at that time that I really, really learned about women's health. Really how to practice with your cycle, really how to honor and respect what your body is going through for whatever reason. And it like, I won't say that it resolved my problems, but I became free of pain. And, I actually ended up treating the fibroids medically because I had 2 surgeries. They were laparoscopic procedures. And because the fibroids were very large and they were pressing on my intestines and my bladder and it was killing them. And no matter what yoga you do, it's not going to change that. But it helped me, to go through the surgery and survive the surgery. Then they grew right back, so there's just some things that you can't control, but I learned to practice so I wouldn't have pain and I could sustain what I was going through. And my gynecologist there, I didn't have health care here because the States is terrible for health care. I didn't have it, so I would get it there. My gynecologist always wanted me to do a hysterectomy, but she just honored what I did. And I didn't reach menopause, you're not going to believe this, until I was 59. And so I was always having these issues of heavy bleeding and the fibroids. Finally, I reached menopause, and the doctor said, I can't believe you made it through with all your problems. And I know it's the yoga. The doctor even admitted that it was because of the yoga that I could do it. Anybody else would have gotten a hysterectomy, like 15 years before, but I chose my path. I wouldn't choose it for everyone. If somebody needs to get the hysterectomy, get the hysterectomy. I had the yoga to keep me out of pain. And also during the times when I was menstruating every month, and really I was hemorrhaging. That's the chapter in my book about how to practice with that and how to, overcome the dysfunction of that. And it helped me to survive, and I made it through intact. And so I wanted to share that with everybody. And actually I was saying, Geeta, you need to write a book because what you've shown me, I want everybody to know, what you taught me. And she's like, no, you write the book. And I said, no, you write the book. And we went back and forth. You write it, you write it, you write it. And she won. And I remember I had a draft and she said, no, because I had many different sequences in this first draft of the menstrual practices. And she said, no, just write one practice, but that's actually all she guided me. From there, I just wrote the whole thing. And then finally, when I had like a final draft for her approval, she came back and handed me the draft, and I went through it. And I'm so heartened by the fact that there were hardly any corrections. There were some corrections, yes, and I had to redo some photos. And I went to her and I said, Geeta, I looked at your corrections, and I said, are you sure? And she went like this, where, the Indian shaking of the head, and I was like, okay. And I was so, amazed that I really, in those 2 years, I really did learn from her, and I wanted to share it with the world. But I also knew, here's a funny side of the story, I didn't want it to show it to Guruji until after it was printed and published, because Guruji is such a perfectionist. It never would have gotten done. As it was, actually, that book, I would say, took me 15 years from beginning to end. The back and forth about, no, you write it, no, you write it. It went on for a long time. And then when it was finally done, I sent a final copy, it was printed. And before the mass printing, I asked Guruji, if he would write something. And I was so touched by what he wrote on the back of the book. But then when I got to Pune, He had the book on his desk, and I was in the library, and he's like, Lois, come here. And he opens the book. I'm sitting right next to him, and he opens the book, and then he's sipping his coffee, and he's staring at this picture I have in the beginning of the book. When I took that picture, it's even up here on my wall. When I took that picture, it was a candid shot. And then, he noticed I took, he said, oh, you got lucky with that one. He loved that picture, and he would stare at it. And then he started turning the pages, and he's like, see this picture? I remember it was Arda Chandrasen. He said, see this? See the lines on the cloth of your shirt? It shows me that your abdomen is going backwards instead of coming forward. And he went through it like that. Can you imagine? That book never would have gotten done based on just the way the lines are on the clothing, showing some deeper problems with whatever I was presenting. But I was touched that he, sat down and went through the book with me. But I'm glad I didn't do that before it was printed and finalized. It never would have come out. Even with his own work, he'd be rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and the publishers would literally go down there and pull whatever he was doing out from under him because it had to go to print. It was, never a completed work. I wanted to share with the world what Gita taught me. What's funny is during that, it was 1997, the Women's Intensive. That was another way I was like, Gita, we have to have an intensive course just for women, because I want people to learn. So many people didn't know so many things, and I wanted them to learn. So we had this intensive course, and during the course, we also met to put on a performance for the annual day celebration. It was called The Role of Yoga in Women's Life. And so we marched up on the platform, and everybody started laughing because one of the students, I gave her my feather pillow that I happened to have instead of those hard Indian pillows to stuff her abdomen with to pretend she was pregnant. And so we had the young age of the woman at menarche, beginning their childbearing years, and then the pregnancy years, and then the menopausal years and the postmenopause. We had all these years, and we were doing all the poses. We had made this whole program of most of the poses from Light on Yoga. But when it came time to perform it, there was a man speaking on during the annual day about the year's activities and the number of books acquired in the library. It was so boring. People fell asleep, and he took 2 hours, and it cut into our performance, and we had to cut a lot of things out. And I was really bummed because one thing that people didn't know about was the pose called cross bolsters. Like most people know it as Setu Bandha Sarvangasana, that you do it on the cross bolsters, but the shoulders are down on the floor. And there's a pose actually called cross bolsters in and of itself, where it's a combination of Dvipada Viprita Dandasana and Setu Bandha Sarvangasana. And so if you do it early in the practice, it's very different. The head is back. But if it's not a pose you do, like say at the end of the practice, if you're going to do an alternative for shoulder balance, and you say, well, do cross bolsters, you have to make clear it's Setu Bandha Sarvangasana done on the cross bolsters. It's not the pose cross bolsters, which has too long a name in Sanskrit because it's two poses together. And so people didn't know about this pose, and it got cut out. And I think that was the impetus to keep going with my woman's book. And to this day, I still struggle with people understanding the difference between cross bolsters as its own pose and Setu Bandha Sarvangasana done on cross bolsters. People still don't understand the difference, and when it should be done and how it's to be done. But I keep trying. But to get back to your question, yes, yoga is a powerful tool to not solving women's health issues, but living with them, especially for women who suffer from endometriosis. It's such a painful condition. And women who take to the yoga who have endometriosis, my experience is that it really helps them. They're not so symptomatic. But when they don't practice the yoga, it comes full force back. So I'm not going to say it's solving it, but definitely it can reduce the pain when you're practicing, that you can live with it. Because it's not an easy cure. Even women who opt to do a hysterectomy, it doesn't necessarily cure it, because the part of the problem is the endometrial cells that get out of the uterine cavity can go into other parts, the parts of the body that's even in the intestinal system. So you don't solve the problem just by removing the uterus necessarily, especially if it's in other parts. It can be anywhere in the body cavity. And when you practice the yoga, I know women, it's just like sometimes it just even goes away. But when they don't practice, if they give it up, it's not like one day you miss practice, but when you're not practicing for some time, it will come back. It's not going to solve it, but you can live with it in a much better way, where you're not experiencing the pain and the discomfort of it.
So for those women who are on the journey to deal with their health issues, what are the precautions that should be taken care of to ensure safe practice?
Well, this is an interesting question. I hope it's not too long an answer, but when Gita was alive, you really had to practice the menstrual practice when you were in class and in your own practice. You had to go to a part of the room where all the women with menses were practicing. And then there came a time where, after decades of this, because people would lie, and she would say, women in their periods go to this part of the room. And then all of a sudden, when it came time to do head balance, somebody would come up and say, well, I have my period. And they say, well, why didn't you go to that part of the room? And it's because, well, I didn't want to miss anything. And even if you did go to that part of the room, if you were looking and watching, you would get yelled at, because when you're watching somebody do something you shouldn't be doing, you actually take it into your body, and your body feels that. Just like, I don't want to digress on this, but when you're teaching, you put yourself in your student's body, actually, and you can feel how they're going wrong. And so that's how you can teach to them. And it's the same thing when you're watching a practice that you shouldn't be doing. You're going to be taking that in your body. And so you weren't allowed to do anything but the menstrual practice. And after decades of that, it finally got ingrained in practitioners that you had to do the menstrual practice when you practice. Okay. Then they changed when they realized, yes, it's ingrained, that now that you understand what to do, we realize you're here for only a month or 2 months and that you feel like you're missing. So we're going to allow you in the class to do the practice with the group and modifying. For example, don't do Virabhadrasana 2 holding it for a long time. That's really going to harm, it's going to bring a lot of stress to the pelvic cavity. So maybe you can go into the pose, come out, hold on to the trestle, or, back to the wall. Don't hold it for a long time, or you can do Parshva a similar pose instead, with the hand on the block to keep the pelvis open. But you can join the class. And so then you had to learn, though, what those modifications were, how to keep up with the class. Simple thing is, like, instead of Suptapada and Gustasana, where the leg is straight up, you do the Parshva variation to keep the pelvis open. Because when the leg is up, it creates a heaviness. It can create a heaviness, especially when you have the, heavy flow there. You don't want any kind of what I call a fulcrum hitting into that abdomen. So you take it to the side and you open the pelvis. Or even in forward bends, not to do a full forward bend, because there could be a tendency, especially if you're not a good practitioner, to harden the abdomen. So you can support the head on a height for 2 purposes: to have the pelvis open more, to sit on a height also, so the pelvic area is more long and spread, but also to support the head, because when you have your period, there could be, like, there's a heavy load in the brain that you experience when you're having your period, especially when it's, an early day of the period where it's more intense. But then there's the aspect of, how do you include the menstruating student in the back bend week of class. Because, in the early days, when I first started, I used to go to this yoga camp in Michigan, and we didn't know anything about the period. Nothing. Gita's book wasn't published yet. And when we were driving home from like 10 days of camp, and the last day was intense back bends, one of my friends said, you know what? When we were doing the back bends, my period stopped. I never had my period stop. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to, stop. You don't want to change the natural period, for its usual time. And so I kind of got an inkling early on that that's weird. And then I learned all this stuff, but people didn't really know how to do back bends during the period. And one time during, I remember it was a Friday night, it was back bend week, and the class was packed with so many people. And I was having my period, and Gita knows my situation where I was really always hemorrhaging with my period, basically, because of my fibroids. And I was to conduct the period people because I was back there and I could be counted on to conduct them. But for whatever reason, Gita decides to have me get up and take the period group. There were a lot of people, and also other people were with me for other reasons, not just for periods. I should take them all to the rope wall. And the whole class was watching this, and she was showing me what to do with them. And one of the things to do of many was sitting with backwards in the chair, putting the shins on the rungs of the chair and go back to Kapotasana and come up. In the chair, go back and come up, go back and come up. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And then she's having me do like intense, not just rope one, but other ropes while I have my period for the period people. Okay, this was very strange. And everybody was kind of watching with their mouths dropped even, what was going on. And also she put other people with me because the class was so big and I could be helping her out. And then she's like, okay. And she walks away. But as she's walking by, she says, you take care of yourself now, because she knew my problem. If I were to do those back bends, I could bleed more. But I don't know. I think all she taught me, I just knew how to do the poses. I was teaching them, and I just figured it out. And I realized after it was all over, after people were all watching in amazement, wow, you can do back bends when you have your period, even if you bleed heavy, when you're really careful not to hit the abdomen at all, and to lengthen and spread the abdominal cavity, the chest cavity. And my period actually felt good. I didn't hemorrhage more, as would have happened. And so I just figured it out. And I think that was just because Gita taught me so well, and I listened to my body. And even though she didn't tell me specifically what to do, because I had been there a long time studying, I figured it out, and I was able to actually not only figure it out, but help everyone to do this practice. It was an intense learning experience. And then I knew, okay. But what's really funny is years later, Savita was teaching, and they were already in this mode that you can do with the class as long as you learn how to modify the practice. And with the caveat that in your own practice, though, you're still doing the menstrual practice. It's just that you're here for short time. You don't want to miss. Okay. But you know what to do in real life so that you take care of your health and you do the needful during the period. And Savita was in a certain mood, let's say, and she was organizing the class, and it was back bends week, and she just kind of shouted, okay, and the menstrual people, just go over there and do the menstrual practice because you don't know how to do it anyway. The back bends with the class. She wasn't going to bother, but it's possible, but you have to learn how to do it. But the important thing is, in your practice, I actually I don't miss having my periods, but I miss those 5 days of taking time out and getting absorbed in that wonderful, wonderful menstrual practice of like forward bends, and then the transition using like Dvipada Viparita Dandasana on the chair, and then the supine poses, and then Seru Bandha. I love that practice. And also the beginning of the practice from my book, like the Adho Mukha Svanasana with the lower rope, where your lower abdomen is really extended. You could rest your forehead, cool your brain. Ardha Uttanasana, Uttita Parshvahasta Padangustasana, opening the pelvis. Ardha Chandrasana. Oh my God, Ardha Chandrasana is like the best pose for getting rid of cramps and lengthening the uterus and opening the pelvis and even the brain becoming quiet. And then Supta Parshva Padangustasana, and even seated like Parvatasana with your back to the wall and then bending forward, Adho Mukha Virasana. You know, there's so many wonderful forward bends to do, and your brain gets quiet, your body gets quiet, your abdomen feels sober. And then when you go to open up the body in the passive supine, like back extensions, you feel so calm and relaxed. Who wouldn't want to do that for like 4 or 5 days once a month? Even the
Yeah.
men should do it. One time I had a man come to class because, you know, the people go to a certain part of the room. He's like, I'm going over in the corner today. Like he just practiced with the other woman, you know, because
Mhm.
that's what the body needs. That's what the brain needs. Maybe other women practitioners, you know, who are postmenopausal, maybe they feel like me. I don't miss having the period, but I miss taking that time in the practice to really quiet the body, really quiet the mind, and, you know, enjoy that restful time. It's like a time out, and it's wonderful. I don't know if you feel
Mhm.
that. Have you
I
felt
feel it.
that?
Yeah, totally. It is
Yeah.
like it starts and you just now I'm taking care of myself and I'm just resting and it really feels like 5 days of rest and I'm really grateful for the practice that you have given in the book. I've been following it for the last couple of months and I've been practicing menstrual practice before, but some of the examples that you have given were new to me. And this is literally what they do in India. In fact, like these days are only for rest. This is the time when women are not allowed to go to the kitchen. Women are just resting. They're not doing anything around the house. Just
Hmm.
rest and be
In
with
fact, a lot
yourself.
of the local students, the Indian students, don't even come to class when they have their period. But we're
Yeah.
there because we're only there for a month and we don't want to miss and all that.
Yeah, it's true. In what ways did you see yoga playing a pivotal role in treating cancer? And maybe also if you could talk about particular phase of cancer treatment. I watched some of your classes where you're given a workshop for Russian students and they're helping you out in the medical classes. And there were a few patients who were recovering from cancer or who were in active phase of cancer. So when does yoga help the most?
Well, I want to say you're using the word treating diseases with cancer. It's really that it's a complementary treatment. You know, don't
Mm-hmm.
ever think that yoga practice is going to cure your cancer, but it can help you to live with the cancer and to cope with the treatment of the cancer, which is brutal, which can be brutal. You know, the surgeries, the chemotherapies, and the radiation. Um, it's the best that the medical world has right now. And it gets better, but not much. You know, to me, gosh, radiation is so barbaric. At some point, maybe they'll have something besides that. Um, because the treatment in the medical world can also kill you. The chemo can kill you. The radiation can over radiate you and harm you and kill you. Um, but it has been better, and people are actually living with cancer longer. It's the medical world has progressed in that they don't really like to stage cancers. They like to think that you have this condition and you're living with it and you treat it. And yoga can be complementary to that. So there's practices for when you're feeling ill from the treatment, especially one of a common side effect is nausea. And so you can learn how to help, what poses to do for alleviating the nausea, the fatigue, the overheating of the body from radiation. I've worked with people who actually were over radiated, and oh my God, you can just put your hand close to the spot. And it's like, whoa, it's just emanating back and oozing sometimes. So sometimes the treatment can be overdone, and how to cool the body down with that. And this is the practice of yoga is very intertwined with Ayurveda, which is a medicine that comes out of India and thinks of disease as either heating or cooling, just to keep it simple. And cancer is actually a heating disease. And the treatment also is heating. Opposite to that, like arthritis is a cooling disease. The circulation is not very much. And so you have to heat the body. But in cancer, you have to cool the body. And not to mean that you have to lie around all the time, because you could move. There was this misperception that if you move a lot during cancer, that it can stimulate the cancer. And I don't know why that still exists, but that's not true at all. And even in the medical world, they say, walking is good. Getting the body to move is good. And, you have to keep the circulation invites health. So you have to keep that circulation moving. But when you're so exhausted, so fatigued, so unwell, there's yoga practices to do for that. And most of them are cooling practices, some seated poses, supine poses, and to allow the body to cool down. And there's still ways, for example, there's a category of poses called L shapes. And the Sanskrit name is like Samashrayi, meaning it's the same shape where the torso is upright and the legs are parallel, or Upashray, which means reclined, where the torso is more reclined and the legs are like parallel to the floor. So you have simple cross legs, or Baddha Konasana legs, or Dandasana legs, Upavista Konasana legs, but you can be bending forward and then upright and back, and then change the legs, go forward, upright and back. And that helps to, each leg position changes the opening of the groins and the circulation in the very basin of the pelvis, which would relate to the very base chakra, the Muladhara chakra, to get that open. Most of us, it's blocked even when we're well. And to help to open the groins and let that prana, that energy, run through the body instead of being blocked by the cancer or blocked by the treatment, and you're getting rest. So you're getting movement, even though you're still, you're opening and creating circulation. So there's many practices I have in my book, the Iyengar Yoga Cancer book. And there's that movie that you described. It's a 36-minute film that you can find on YouTube. I think if you type my name, and a lot of videos come up, and there are people there with cancer. In fact, the one woman in there who's interviewed, she's still alive today after recovering from her pancreatic cancer. She had a laparotomy where the whole front of the body was cut open, and she had, her pancreas removed, her gallbladder removed, her split, so many things were removed, and they thought she was going to die. And they didn't even sew her up right away. And they even left some metal inside of her that developed to MRSA, this horrible infection where nobody wanted to open her up to take it out. And when I met her, I thought she was actually not long for this world, because I know this is strange, but you get familiar with when people are close to death, when you work with a lot of people, and, just the pallor of her skin, the color of her eyes, even the breath, it wasn't good. And I just thought, okay, I'm going to help this woman to go peacefully. But she ended up doing like everything that everybody told her. And she's still alive today, like 15 years later. I don't know, when was that done? She's still alive and thriving, not just alive, but she's thriving. And it's amazing. And the yoga really helped her. As you can see in the movie, it's quite moving. In fact, a lot of people said it brought them to tears. But also at the same time, I've also helped people to transition to passing, through the yoga, and they've appreciated it. And especially when you work with them through the breath. It helps with that transition. So yeah, Iyengar Yoga has a big impact, not just helping people with cancer, but all kinds of, conditions that, are challenging.
So interesting how it all developed and how many people are finding relief and
Mm-hmm.
benefit from yoga, no
Mm-hmm.
matter what condition they're in.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So moving on to your adventures, I was really excited to hear about the project that you're on in Botswana. So you're actively involved in building the first wildlife rescue in
Well, it's not
Botswana.
the first one,
Okay, so please
but
share more.
it's because it was shut down. So what happened
Uh-huh.
was last year I went on safari for a month and with Tony Antalamo, who has his business is Tony Mobile Safari. And I was lucky because I realized he's the best guide in all of Botswana. And we were observing a leopard, and I said, Tony, that leopard's jaw is broken. Let's call the wildlife rescue. Because I know other countries have it, like, Namibia and Kenya and South Africa. And I thought, surely Botswana is. He said, we don't have one. I'm like, why? Well, in 2010, there was a corrupt veterinarian from South Africa who was working for the Botswana, I don't know what it was called, but a wildlife rescue where they rescued the wildlife and either, put them back, would rehabilitate them, put them back into the wild, or they would help them peacefully transition to death without suffering. But they discovered he was trafficking the animals for profit. And so
Mm-hmm.
the government, they went to arrest him, but he fled the country. And ever since 2010, they haven't had one because of him. And I'm like, then he won, you know? And so I was like, we have to do something. This isn't right. That leopard ended up dying. He was 3 years old. He could have, because all the wildlife are all endangered. The habitats are endangered. And it's not just that you're rescuing the wildlife, but you're also creating a way to sustain communities. Botswana only has 200,000 people. About 70% of the land is actually wildlife, but they still have human wildlife conflict. And they, the tourism is one of the biggest supporters of human life there. So how can you have both and sustain the people and the wildlife together to profit together? And so this is the purpose of having this wildlife rescue, to reestablish it. And I'm still working on not-for-profit status. I have it with the state of Illinois, but I also have to get it with the federal government. And I was waiting on Tony's end because I'm a not-for-profit that's supporting his not-for-profit. And he just recently got one. He had to jump through many more hoops than I did because Botswana is really, really strict about doing projects like these, and especially with the past experience. So he's got approval. He's got a trust now. And now I have to apply with our federal government through the Internal Revenue Service. That will take a while. But so I went again this year only for 2 weeks. I wish it was the month like last year. And we visited the land he had to secure to have this project. And it needs 2 bore wells, and we have to raise $50,000 to have these bore wells, and also an airstrip for all this stuff to happen. So it's a huge project. And basically what we're trying to achieve is to lessen human wildlife conflict, to preserve the habitat for both the people and the wildlife, and to also help the wildlife that get caught up in like poaching, which is terrible. Botswana doesn't have as much of a poaching problem as its surrounding countries. Botswana is a landlocked country surrounded by
Mm-hmm.
South Africa, Namibia, Angola, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. It's landlocked. So it's harder to traffic the animals, the wildlife out when there's, no ports actually. But there is still poaching, especially in the north at the river area. So in fact, Botswana, many years ago, there were only 4 rhinoceroses left, and they were getting poached. because they were crossing to the different countries where the poaching was more. And so they captured them and they made Kama Rhino Sanctuary that I visited for the first time. And now they have 40 rhinoceroses. Yeah, and it was wonderful seeing them. We saw two mothers and two babies, like, gosh, just like an arm's distance away. It was really wonderful. Yeah, I'm very excited about this project. And I hope we can raise funds to get it going more. Yeah, so it's just in the beginning. It's in the nascent stages.
Mm-hmm. So how many years do you think it will take you to get to the final?
Well, it depends on how much money we can raise, and it would also support where this land was bought. It's going to be supporting this nearby village as well, and the school and stuff, and it will support the people. I don't know. You know, it's all unknown. Everything is going to take a long time. You know, it's different than I know in Kenya. They have the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, which I'm a member of, and they've been going for probably 40 years or more. And, you know, they have airplanes and they have darters and veterinarians and they have drones to, you know, watch the animals and help them. We're far from that. So it's just beginning. But, and Tony has also like taken some basic veterinary courses, not to become a veterinarian, but to know how to treat some things. But the staff isn't there yet. Like he has a darter, but we don't have somebody who can easily, like we saw a hippo this time that was had some injuries, probably from maybe from another hippo, whatever, and he knew how to treat it, but the darter, we couldn't get them because we were too far from the darter. So like we have to build an airstrip and be able to have funds to fly a darter to the place and dart the animal and treat them and get them on their way. Yeah. Or sometimes you have to take the wildlife back to where your base is to treat them and rehab them and release them into the wild. Yeah.
This is
So
so
it's going to take a long
fascinating.
time. Yeah.
But all the best. How people who are interested could support you?
Well, if you just go to loissteinberg.com, there's a place on my website for that. And it's right now it's in a GoFundMe, but it's not fully realized as a not-for-profit if you're an American to get you know, tax benefit from donating. But if you want to donate, please donate, and we will get not-for-profit status hopefully soon.
I want to ask you the final question, which I ask every teacher who I speak with. As you know, the name of this project is the Force Niyama, which is direct reference to Patanjali Yoga Sutras and specifically to Svadhyaya. So what does Svadhyaya mean to you?
Well, of course, everyone knows it as self-study.
Mm-hmm.
And that self-study can take place in many ways. And in my personal journey, and I think a lot of us who are Iyengar Yoga practitioners, it starts with studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And, you know, at first it's very hard to even, I didn't know what Svadhyaya even meant at first. And then when I first went through the Yoga Sutras, actually I started with Taimni, his sutras, because Guruji didn't write his yet. And I tried to read it from cover to cover. That was a mistake, you know. And then I decided, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to memorize the sutras. And so every day, and I studied Hindi when I was in graduate school, so I could read Devanagari script. So I actually would study it in the Devanagari script, and then I would chant it. I would actually ride my bike out to this park and take a walk until I had memorized the sutra. And then on my bike ride home, I would chant all the sutras I had memorized up until that point, until I memorized all the sutras, but without knowing their meaning.
Wow.
I just was memorizing it and learning by that sound, you know, that it's also the sound that means something.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started studying more each individual sutra, what it meant. And that's very impactful, you know, to study the sutras in that depth and that way. And so like whatever sutra I would study that day, a lot of times what would happen then is in my asana practice or even in other activities, it would come up. it would rear its head in the practice and it would make sense and meaning to me. I don't do that anymore. I don't chant the sutras every day like I did, but it's still, because I did it for many, many years, it's part of me. It's just like, okay, I used to do Natyajasana once a week, but I don't do it anymore, but it's still part of me. It will always be there. And that's also the base of my practice and my love of the yoga. So
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lois.
thank
It
you and
was,
good luck with this project.
thank you. Was really inspiring, and some of the things that you spoken about just came on time when I needed to hear them the most.
Thank you, Katerina. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you, Lois. Thank you for tuning in. It was a great privilege and pleasure to speak with Lois Steinberg. May this project serve as a support and encouragement on your yoga journey. See you in the next episode.